We're going to dive into a pretty wild divorce case out of Australia today, and it's one of those stories that really sticks with you. It's got millions of dollars on the line, a separation that drags on for years, and a legal mistake that just about changed everything. And it all boils down to one very expensive question.
Here it is. This is the number at the absolute center of this whole story. $437,628. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how much the wife in this case spent on her lawyers. And here's the kicker. She paid for it straight out of the couple's shared savings after they had already separated. And that right there is the big question. When one person dips into the joint bank account to fund their side of a legal battle, is that fair game? Should the courts just ignore it and pretend that money never existed, or should it be counted against them in the final split? This is the exact puzzle the Australian family court had to figure out.
All right, so to really understand what happened here, you've got to know who we're talking about. Because this wasn't just some straightforward separation. No, this was a messy, complicated saga, both financially and emotionally, that went on for almost a decade. Okay, picture this. The financial gap between these two is just massive. You've got the husband, Mr. Trevi, a top lawyer, pulling in $30,000 a week. His own legal fees covered by his firm. On the other side, you have his wife. For 19 years, she was a homemaker, a parent, with zero personal income. So to pay that enormous legal bill we just saw, she had to use money from the sale of their family home. You could already feel the tension, right? That power imbalance is really what set this whole thing in motion. And this was no quick, clean break. Not at all. They officially separated in 2008, and this is where it gets kind of weird, they kept living on the same property, just in different houses, for another 6 years. The final trial didn't even wrap up until 2017. Can you imagine trying to sort out your finances after 8.5 years of being stuck in that kind of limbo? That long, drawn-out timeline is absolutely crucial to understanding the legal mess that came next. So finally, after a marathon 13-day hearing, the judge makes a call. She decides the wife should get 60% of their nearly $10 million asset pool. Seems reasonable, right? But here's the twist. In her final math, she completely ignored that $437,000 the wife had spent on lawyers. The husband was livid, because from his point of view, this meant he was basically being forced to pay for 60% of his wife's lawyers to fight against him. So how on earth did that happen? Well, the answer is hiding in a really interesting legal concept. It's a tool the courts in Australia can use to deal with money that seems to have, vanished from the shared pot before a divorce is finalized. It's called an add-back. And you can think of it like a judge hitting a rewind button. They can say, hey, that money you spent, we're going to pretend it's still here. We're going to notionally add it back into the pot before we divide everything up. And whatever you spent is then counted as part of your share. Now, this isn't something they do all the time. It's really the exception for things like, recklessly wasting money or paying legal fees. And for legal fees, there's a pretty clear guideline. It's basically a simple two-step test. First, the court asks, where did the money come from? Was it a shared asset, like cash from selling the house? If the answer is yes, you move to step 2. Should that money be added back? And the legal guideline on this is crystal clear. Almost always, the answer is yes. This is the whole mechanism that tries to make sure each person pays for their own legal fight. So this is the, not million-dollar question, but the $437,000 question, isn't it? The wife's legal fees came directly from selling the family home. That's a textbook shared asset. The guideline says you add it back. It seems like a slam dunk, and yet this experienced judge refused to do it. Why? That one decision is what blew this whole case wide open and sent it to an appeal. Of course, the husband appealed. And this is when the higher court puts the original decision under a microscope. And what they found wasn't just a simple disagreement. Nope. They found what they called a fundamental error in the judge's legal reasoning. This quote from the appeal court's judgment really says it all. The key word there is confusion. They found that the judge's entire decision was based on a mix-up. She had jumbled together two completely different legal tools, and that led to a totally flawed result. This wasn't about feelings or fairness. This was a straight-up technical error. Okay, let me break this down because this is the whole case right here. The judge had two tools in her toolbox. Tool number 1 is the add back we talked about, putting the money back in the pot. Tool number 2 is called a future needs adjustment. That's where you give one person a bigger slice of the final pie. Now, the judge said she was using tool 2, but her logic, her reasoning, was all based on the test for tool 1.
It's like she tried to hammer in a nail, but explained herself by reading from the instruction manual for a power drill. That confusion was the fatal flaw. So what about that whole argument that it wasn't fair because the husband's firm was paying his legal fees? That was the trial judge's main reason for her decision. Well, the appeal court basically said, so what? They ruled that his unusual circumstance had absolutely zero logical connection to whether the wife's spending from their shared money should be accounted for. It was, in their words, totally irrelevant. And here's the bottom line. The appeal court pointed out the huge consequence that the first judge just completely glossed over. By not adding those fees back, she effectively forced the husband to pay for 60% of his wife's legal bill, all without ever actually making an official order for him to do so. That's a huge no-no in Australian family law. And just like that, the appeal was successful.
So the appeal court tossed out the original order, sending it back to be recalculated the right way. But this story is so much bigger than just a legal win for the husband. It's packed with some hard truths for anyone out there trying to navigate a separation.
All right, first hard truth, and it's a blunt one. That joint account is not your personal war chest. Any big money you spend after you separate is going to be put under a microscope, especially if it's going to lawyers. Which leads to truth number 2. Legal fees are a financial black hole. The starting point for any court is that you pay your own way. Paying your lawyer from a joint account is almost always just seen as getting an advance on your final payout. Third, and this is something a lot of people get wrong, a huge income does not automatically mean you get a bigger piece of the pie. In a long marriage like this one, the court saw the wife's 19 years as a homemaker and parent as an equally valuable contribution to the husband's giant salary. And fourth, please remember that separating doesn't hit a pause button on your finances. The final split is based on what you have on the day of the trial, which could be years away. A lot can change in that time. And finally, the last truth, and it might just be the most important one this case teaches us. The courtroom is a battle of logic, not emotion. Mr. Trevi didn't win his appeal by shouting about what was fair. He won by methodically, carefully finding a single technical mistake in the judge's reasoning. It's such a powerful reminder that, in a legal fight, a clear argument is always more powerful than a loud one. You know, in the end, this case just shows you how delicate the balance is in family law. The whole system is built on the idea that a judge can use their discretion to find a fair outcome in messy human situations. But, as the Trevis found out the hard way, when that discretion is based on a simple confusion, the road to justice can turn into a very costly, years-long detour. It really makes you wonder, when so much depends on the thinking of just one person, how fair can the outcome really be?